Jujutsu Kaisen is a manga series by Gege Akutami, originally published in the serialized magazine Shonen Jump, and later got adapted into an anime that recently concluded its first season, and even more recently a prequel movie. The series itself is still ongoing, and currently on chapter 185 or so. As of right now, it's one of the most popular manga series in the world, and currently holds the #1 spot in the Jump magazine. Premise-wise, it's your typical modern shonen. Normal boy protagonist gets demon powers from an ancient demon and fights demons. Or, well, curses. Same thing, really. It may sound like I'm being cynical, but as someone who's read the entire series and also watched the anime and movie, JJK deserves its hype. I wasn't even a big fan of anime until maybe last year. Akutami is undoubtedly a good writer, though. His characters are compelling and his themes are consistently portrayed throughout the narrative. I could make countless hours of video describing what about the series I actually do like, but I decided to be a downer instead and talk about the part of it that I find lacking, that being how Akutami writes female characters. JJK has been endlessly praised for its female cast, and I don't think that praise is entirely undeserved, especially when it comes to the anime alone. But I think that a lot of the credit is regrettably derived from the fact that it's pretty rare for shonen to have even the barest amount of effort put into writing female characters. This has changed, of course, with more recent series like Chainsaw Man and others, but I think people still tend to throw praise at Akutami just because he isn't completely ignoring the female cast, mostly. Honestly, when I first watched the anime, I was really impressed by the girls and women in the show and how interesting and compelling they are, especially characters like Maki and Mai. Where my biggest complaints come in are how Akutami handles the writing of his sole female lead, Nobara Kugisaki. Don't get me wrong, I really like Nobara as a character, which is why it's so disappointing for me to see her get a fraction of the attention that the male leads get. In all truth, I think analyzing the way she's written in both the anime and the rest of the series can reveal some crucial flaws in the way Akutami writes female characters. I'll be splitting this video up into 2 parts in order to avoid spoilers for anyone who hasn't read the manga yet, but be wary of spoilers nonetheless. So without further ado, let's talk about the At the first section of the series, Nobara Kugisaki is honestly a really fucking good character. If I'm being honest, I found her personality kind of annoying to begin with, but I grew to love her by the end of the anime. She's formally introduced only in the 3rd episode, a bit later than the others, but this doesn't hold her back from melding with the cast really well anyway. She's outspoken, stubborn, and very confident in her abilities. She's less peppy and optimistic than Gojo or Yuji, but not a total loner like Megami. She falls kind of in the middle of the dynamic, which serves it pretty well. She has good comedic chemistry with Yuji, and the two of them with Megami create a really good typical anime main trio. Though she doesn't get as much of a focus on her techniques and fighting abilities as the other two do, it's not that hard to get a sense of her fighting style. Her technique revolves around the use of straw dolls, a hammer, and nails as a way of inflicting damage to enemies from afar. We don't know a lot of her backstory except in regard to her relationship with her childhood friend Saori, a girl who was driven out by the countryside oldies in her village. This is set up as a way to exposit why she was so eager to get out of the countryside. Nobara is different from her male counterparts in the way she's less concerned about justice and righteousness in her life as a sorcerer, but there's still plenty of room for development without that aspect. The scene that stands out to me as a good defining character moment for her is her fight with Momo, a student from the sister school and their rival during the exchange event. Momo tries to get Nobara down by saying that it's impossible to succeed as a female sorcerer without being absolutely perfect, not just strong. In her words, Jujutsu society allows no room for female sorcerers to make mistakes, in contrast to their male counterparts. Scars are flaws for women, not badges of honor. Keep that detail in mind when I talk about the manga later. And Nobara's indifference to this fact throws mud at all the female sorcerers who bend over backwards to meet the standards of that alpha system. Nobara responds by simply stating she doesn't care about what Momo thinks, and she loves herself when she's strong and when she's embracing her femininity. In my opinion, this was honestly a pretty compelling moment and played a part in getting me to like her more. In spite of all this, there are still a few cracks that show in her writing even early on, particularly in regards to her growth, both physically and mentally. The extent of her character development at this part of the series is mainly her reluctance to accept people into her life being challenged by the people she meets and gets to know during her time at the school, something that is further expanded on in the manga, but let's save that for later. What I really want to talk about is how her abilities develop in the anime, or rather, how they don't. Throughout the anime, the abilities of Yuji and Megumi are pretty consistently developed in order to reflect their growth as both a sorcerer and a person. This is especially true of the former because, well, he's the protagonist. But even Megumi gets a few really fantastic scenes that show his growth as an individual. For both of these characters, we know the mechanics of their abilities and powers on an intimate level. The same is true of Gojo, and even though it's established that he's reached his fullest potential and has no room for growth, his powers are still shown to the audience in great detail. This is of course less important in comparison to the many scenes showing Gojo's characterization and motivation that are also in the anime. And a brief spoiler warning for this part, this is of course all ignoring the fact that he actually does get a whole flashback arc in the manga showing both his relationship with his former best friend and how one mission and his subsequent betrayal affected Gojo, as well as the development of his powers on a more fine scale. Nobara never gets any of this, just a few flashbacks and some self-reflection in the form of conversations with other characters, but never anything as generous as the other leads get. An argument one may have against this is the fact that Nobara has already mastered her abilities and doesn't require growth like the others do. To this I say bullshit. If you're gonna have a trio of three main characters who are all taking their own paths and advancing their abilities as sorcerers, then you have to commit to showing the path that each of those characters take. I think one way this specific aspect in her writing could be fixed is by adding at least a one-on-one scene with her and Gojo. Scenes with Gojo training his individual students often serve as a way of honing in on one big flaw that student has in their fighting style, and potentially in their mindset as a whole. For instance, when Gojo criticizes Megumi's reluctance on Maharaga as a last resort, prompting him to reach a greater potential and use domain expansion. This doesn't even have to be Gojo, I'm just using him as an example. Todo takes on this role when discussing Yuji's emotions with him, and how they hinder him rather than giving him an advantage if he lets them control him too much. Having a scene like this could even allow another female character to get some extra characterization by serving this role for Nobara. Maki is the first that comes to mind, but even Shoko is a possibility. All of my complaints about this part of her character basically boil down to the fact that, even though Nobara is cool and badass, there is a distinct lack of substance in her development when compared to the male leads. I'm not saying the way she's written is bad, I'm saying it's lackluster. One more thing I want to talk about is plot relevancy, but I should probably save that for the I've seen people say that they have a hard time getting attached to Nobara as a character because of her lack of relevance to the plot itself. At first I was quick to deny the importance of this fact. After all, it's enough to have a character just be there. They still have an emotional connection with the other leads, so what's the big deal? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this detail is actually pretty significant, especially in this series in particular. Yuji has a direct connection to Sukuna, of course, and this is where I'm going to get in the final spoiler warning for the entire manga because I'm going to dive deep with this one. So last chance. No? You good? Okay, what I was gonna say is that Yuji also has the fact that he is literally the child of Kenjiku, the main antagonist, and the implications that has on his very existence as a whole. Megumi has the currently very hazy mystery about the reason for Sukuna's interest in him and his powers, which is one of the biggest questions that exist in the series up to this point. And well, Gojo basically is the plot. Nobara, on the other hand, has no connection to Sukuna, Kenjiku, or any other major character. In a nutshell, this basically means that if she were to die, it would have little to no impact on the direction of the plot aside from the emotional impact it would have on the people who care about her, which, funnily enough, is a good segue into the next point I want to bring up. Nobara is fucking dead. Well, not exactly dead, but it's heavily implied that she may be. Of course, that's not enough for it to be definite, especially when Akutami is usually extremely blunt about how when characters do die, they can't come back. So for now, the exact details of her status are not very clear. But let's just say for the sake of simplicity and benefit of the doubt that Nobara is coming back at some point. Let's say that she's gonna get a big cool comeback at the end of this current arc, don't worry about it. But that doesn't justify keeping her on the bench for around 70 chapters at this point. But Marsh, you cry. Gojo has been locked up for even longer than that, so why aren't you complaining about that? That's because Gojo, as I mentioned earlier, has already reached his full potential as a sorcerer. The only thing he has left to come to terms with are his lingering attachment to Geto and his seeming indifference when it comes to Yuji's fate, in contrast to his insistence on protecting the lives of young sorcerers. And all that shit can wait for later as far as I'm concerned. Gojo's absence is also an opportunity for the other characters to get stronger without relying on him as an ex machina. In conclusion, I'm right, so fuck you. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let's talk about how exactly we wound up in this situation to begin with. During the Shibuya incident arc in which Kenjiku executes his plan of sealing Gojo, Nobara ends up helping Yuji during a confrontation with Mahito. I can't lie, this fight is fantastic. Nobara so clearly tries to piss off Mahito for the sake of Yuji, and Mahito notes how, because of her ability, Nobara is basically another natural enemy for him. It's a fun fight between two fun characters and I enjoy it. Then Mahito catches them both off guard and manages to lay his hand on her face for long enough to blow up her entire eye and the region around it. There's a flashback scene that shows Nobara's relationship with Saori in greater detail, as well as a frankly pretty heart-wrenching scene of her admitting that, during her time at the school, she actually has come to find some people she genuinely cares about. But none of this matters because, in the long run, Nobara's death ends up getting bogged down by the countless other emotionally impactful scenes of this arc. There's Gojo sealing in his reaction to seeing Kenjiku manipulate Geto's body, which comes a lot before that to be fair. But the two scenes that come directly before it are Nanami's death and Sukuna's takeover and Yuji's subsequent breakdown. Yuji would already be at his limit with all that even if he didn't have to witness one of his closest friends dying before him. It would actually be preferable if theirs was just a cheap death in order to emotionally wreck Yuji more, but it's clearly not that. So the question remains, what purpose does Nobara's death serve? Perhaps she will return with the missing eye later on and have to more directly come to terms with Momo's claim that scars are only flaws for female sorcerers? Will she finally get a complete character arc and achieve self-actualization in tandem with gaining a new ability like RTC or domain expansion? I hope so. I fucking hope so. You're probably wondering whether this actually says something about Gege's writing as a whole, or whether it's just an inconsequentially lazily written character. But this actually does show a lot about how Gege tends to neglect or completely ignore the female characters in his story, or at least compared to the male ones. The one exception to this rule I distinguish is Maki. She's a solid character from the beginning when her motivations are first introduced. One could make the argument that her character arc with the Zenins is rushed, and that's perfectly valid, but it's still incredibly strong. Her arc focuses on a lot on themes of sexism and jujitsu society as well as the minds of villains like Naoya in general, which I like. But having themes of sexism doesn't exactly excuse the rest of the series from being pretty lazy when it comes to writing its female characters. Let's look at Choco, for instance. It's implied that she's pretty much the only person left who Gojo has a strong emotional connection to, and perhaps the only one who understands the struggles he went through with Geto. Despite this, there is still only a select few scenes of her in JJK0 where we see her reaction to Geto's betrayal, and I think even in these scenes we could have gotten a lot more on her perspective on the matter. And while Hidden Inventory does include her as a supporting character to Gojo and Geto, the main focus is primarily on those two for the length of the arc. What about Mai, since we already discussed Maki? Mai was a good character for the time she was around, and her relationship with her twin showed some pretty strong emotional beats, but I honestly think she was still killed prematurely. There could have been more of an in-depth exploration into her and Maki's relationship, even if her death was a very good scene. There's not much to say about Utsuhime. Her entire character boils down to her liking Shoko and hating Gojo. Mei likes money. Oh, wait, I forgot another one of her character traits. She's a creep. Not much else to say about that one. Yuki is the only one of 4 special grade sorcerers who doesn't have a baseline explanation of their powers, never mind an entire exploration of their depth and motivations. She's also the only female special grade, coincidentally. I sincerely hope we get more from her by the time the series ends. Nagi, Kuroi, Riko, Nanako, and Mimiko were all pretty good characters for the brief time we know them, but they all ended up dying to advance the development of another, usually male character. Sure, I know I shouldn't expect a lot from pure shonen in terms of female character writing, but it's just so frustrating that this is such a big flaw when the rest of the series has almost entirely fantastic writing. Fortunately, the series isn't over yet, and there's still room for Gege to fix some of these issues before it ends, but that doesn't mean he's totally exempt from criticism. In the meantime, I'll be waiting patiently. There's still the tease we got of Miwa during the Culling Games, as well as the possibility of Nobara making a comeback, and Gege actually showing Yuki in action. I'm expecting nothing less than broken powers from her. But that's it from me for now. The links to all my shit will be in the description, and feel free to comment your thoughts about all this after watching. Keep in mind that all of this stuff is just my own opinion, though. You don't have to agree. Thanks for having the patience to get through this messy rant disguised as a video essay, though. If this does well, I'll be more motivated to make similar content in the future.